welcome to another live. We have another guest. This is my second guest ever on a live. It's much better to have a guest because
Yeah.
then I don't have to talk to myself for an hour.
All right.
Uh, yeah, it's definitely much better having a guest with it, and everyone loves like the law enforcement guests because they give insight. And it's like a good dynamic because like I'm an ex-con, you're ex
Yeah.
law enforcement. What do you classify yourself as? Like, what's your official former title?
Yeah. So let's see. Official would be I was an organized crime investigator for the New York State Attorney General's office. So, um, yeah, investigator instead of detective in the same way, like it's gold badge, but every agency kind of does things a little differently. As a matter of fact, they tried when I left just a couple years ago, they tried to change our title to like detective investigator because they thought that would be cooler or something. I don't know, but uh, silly. But it just basically just means detective, really.
Yeah, and then so you did an episode on my show, like in the full long format interview, and I was surprised with how many people were so curious about wiretap investigations.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's they're they don't happen all that often. I mean, obviously we hear about them in the media and stuff, but a lot of people, unless you're involved in a big conspiracy, right? You're in a big drug gang or something like that. Wiretaps usually aren't um all that widely used. So people are like, "Oh man, I see all this stuff on TV. I watch The Wire on HBO, but like, what's it really like, right? What actually happens in a wire?" So, I worked with guys and girls that have been on the job 30, 35 years, never worked a wire, never sat a wire, had no idea how it worked. It's just they're just not used that often. So I'm not surprised people have a lot of questions, and I love talking about it.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, most humble show. Shoot me an email, ian@ianbick.com, and we'll take care of that. Someone asked, can agencies hack into a cell phone?
Ooh, it depends on what you mean by hack. They're not allowed to, from a legal perspective, they're not allowed to hack, meaning like an external break into the phone. But when we wiretap phones um, with a warrant signed by a judge, nowadays we just go through the telephone company. So everything's digital nowadays. So if you've got a Verizon wireless phone, then we issue the warrant to Verizon, and then Verizon makes a copy of everything that you do, and it happens actually live. So when you make a call, we get to hear the call on our end. We used to kind of hack into the phone, if you will, years and years ago when we had landlines, and so we would have to go out to the street at the end of the street, literally, and we would tap on a wire that was connected to your house. So we would open up this big box and we would see, okay, 31 Main Street, and we would put a little wire on there, and that wire would be able to send the information back to us so we could listen to it, hence the name wiretap. So I guess that's a hack in a way, but from a law enforcement standpoint, no, we don't hack into phones in that way.
What
Now, the
about like
military, totally
yeah.
different.
What
Yeah.
about cloning cell phones? Like we see that in movies all the time. Like, is that possible to do? Like where you clone the phone, you could see everything identical.
Yeah, in theory. Yep. All you would need for something like that is like just a software ability to do that, and what I would say is that it would work in a legal perspective. It would work the same way that a wiretap would, right? We would have to get all of this information, all of this evidence. Obviously, we'd put it all together in an affidavit. We'd go to the judge and we'd say A, B, C, D, and E. Hey, this is why we need to do the phone in this way, and
Mhm.
and then the judge can sign off, and we can do what we have to do. So, um, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So you can do it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, interesting. So, like, a lot of these high profile cases from like a law enforcement perspective, ex law enforcement, do you look at it and like you're going through your head, like knowing all the steps they did to make this arrest happen? Like, because to the public, everyone's shocked, but from what I've learned about law enforcement and interviewing people is that they already know months in advance this is going to happen.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not too shocked, I would say. I'm actually shocked when it comes to high profile cases that things don't get leaked more often. I mean, obviously guys and gals can get in trouble. Clearly you can get jammed up. You can even get arrested, if you leak law enforcement information beforehand. But with the case like Diddy, I can't, to be honest with you, I'm really surprised that something didn't come out beforehand until everybody heard the indictment, and potentially even grand jurors. Imagine if you're a grand juror and you get picked, you get your letter, and you show up and they're like, all right, well, it's your grand jury time. And you're like, okay, I'll go down to the courthouse. And you roll up and they're like, by the way, welcome to the case. We're going to freaking indict Diddy. And you're like, what? But, and I can't believe somebody didn't tell their boyfriend or girlfriend and then it just got out. But, um, yeah, I will say, yeah, I'm surprised. Afterwards, though, when I see the indictment, I read it. As a matter of fact, I was just reading Diddy's indictment. They posted it in the New York Times. I was just skimming through it to see if I had some of the things that I may have been missing, but um, it's uh, it's pretty in depth, man. Diddy's in a lot of trouble. He's in a lot of trouble. You don't come up with a first of all, this is a very short indictment specifically for Diddy. There's only 14 pages in this, so this basically means that the the U.S. Attorney's Office came out and just said, "Hey, we're gonna broad brush this thing. We're just gonna speak on wave tops. We're gonna talk about the just the generalized evidence that we have for some of his behavior, and that's the only thing that we're gonna put out. I guarantee you, there's an indictment, a supplemental that's hundreds of pages long. That's that just hasn't been released. That has every single piece of information in it that." I'm sure the public would be pretty shocked to read once it comes out. But
Do you think other people are gonna be taken down like they said? Because they said that about Epstein and then no one got taken down.
yeah, let me say, Epstein is such a weird case because we've talked before. You know me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist guy, right? I'm like facts and evidence, that kind of thing.
Except for TikTok.
Except for TikTok, but I can talk about that. That's different. But to me, well, from my military side, TikTok's not a conspiracy. We'll just put it that way. But the Epstein thing, which I have no involvement in, right? I had nothing to do with that case or anything like it. But that that case is just weird. I can't I can't put my finger on it, right? The fact, let me just put it this way. Has everybody seen, I'm sure you've all seen, you've been watching the news recently, right, of the Israeli pager incident that happened in Lebanon, right, where they put all these pagers on the Hezbollah knuckleheads and they blew 1,500 of these things up, and it's been an intelligence operation they've been doing for 15 years. They just pulled the trigger on it. The Israelis are really, 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 really good at what they do. Now, I would never say that they're better than the United States, but I would say from a counterterrorism and counterintelligence standpoint, they're as good as we are. Why do I say that about Epstein? Because there is some weird um, conspiracy-like information out there. There's weird ties back to that side of the pond that just adds to the craziness of that case. So I don't know. Again, I don't know directly, but I'm not surprised that some weird things happened in that case. The
I
Diddy thing to me is very straightforward. But go ahead. Go ahead.
No, it's just like I don't know. I think a lot of people mix like coincidence with conspiracy. Like I've been in, I don't know, the Epstein thing. Like I've been in where Epstein was, in federal
Yeah.
prison, and that I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of theories going around. I don't know if that actually happened, but it also looks bad on the government side that the list never got put out and this and that. Like the timing's
Yeah.
terrible. But that's why I
Yep.
think that because I was exactly where Diddy is and
Yep.
now, and I think that they're doing everything possible to make sure that doesn't happen. Like if imagine they have a second
Oh,
Epstein
sure.
situation, they're done.
Oh, yeah. No,
That is
yeah.
not
No
good.
doubt. No doubt. Hey, and I'm normally with you, right? Because bad shit happens, right? I mean, just
Yeah.
things happen. People that are looking at life in prison that finally got caught, sometimes they kill themselves, right? And sometimes you have COs that don't make a lot of money and they're overworked and they've been in the prison for or the county jail, wherever they're working, they're in there 70 hours a week, they're working triples, whatever it is, and they just screw up, right? And they just
Mhm.
the guy ends up killing himself and they miss it. And that stuff happens actually a lot, right? But it becomes the big story, obviously, because it's Epstein, and then the conspiracies come out. You're like, "Oh, how could that even imagine?" I can tell you about cops do dumb stuff all the time. They
Yeah,
do dumb stuff all the time. That I was just looking at some of the information about the Karen Reed case that we were talking about earlier, right?
yeah,
And and how there was people that are talking about the investigator who led that, the trooper. I can't remember his name. I think I wrote it down. Proctor, and he sent all these text messages on his work phone about how she was crazy and she was going to get jammed up and that he thought that she was guilty and whatever. And people are using that as like a as again as like a conspiracy language to say, oh well, they knew it beforehand and they're definitely trying to jam her up. And now listen, they're definitely trying to jam her up, and we can talk about that later. But that has nothing to do with him being a dumbass and texting all of these things on his work phone. Like sometimes
yeah.
cops just do dumb stuff, you know?
How do you feel as like a law enforcement officer when there is a mistrial and you got to go through that whole same thing a second time? Because I feel like from the defense attorney side, you're already seeing, you know, the cards the prosecution laid out.
Yeah, it depends on the case, right? If I knew that the case was lock solid, and I did, myself and the prosecutor and whatever, we did everything we could to bring bring the case over the line, if you will, and then the judge calls a mistrial based on the jury or whatever, I would be frustrated because then we would have to do the same thing like literally over again. And in our minds, again, the cases I used to work, like organized crime cases, we knew, right? Like we knew they were guilty. This wasn't like a he said, she said, did he really show up on time? Did he really hit her with the car? What No, these are like wiretap cases. We knew they were, the only way they were going to get out of the case is if something happened on a technicality, if they could drop the phones or drop the wire or whatever it was. So my point is that it would be frustrating to have to do it again. There's so much time and effort that goes into prepping witnesses and all the research and all those things. If it was a case that you thought you screwed up, meaning like you, because this happens a lot too. Prosecutors will go through a whole case, they'll sit down with the investigators and look at it and go, "Hey, we really screwed that up, man. I would love to get another opportunity to present this case." And if it goes to mistrial, you're like, "Perfect. Let's do it again." You know? And when you have a mistrial, you get to really start over. So let's say prosecutors have new witnesses, maybe somebody that they just didn't bring in last time. You can bring that in. You've got new evidence, bring it in. It's a whole new case. So
Were
I
you
guess it depends.
surprised that Diddy didn't get bail? Because I was shocked
No.
from and I went through that, you know.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised given the charges. Come on. I mean, now part of it when it comes to bail is obviously your access. So you want to be able to know where this person is at all times, and then you try to balance how much money you put on the bail for that. But sometimes it's also about the charges. It's about not letting that person get back to the public, and their charges are such that you think they may do more harm, not just about finding them. So not only does Diddy have the means and the money to go wherever the freak he wants and just get on a plane, and that's not to say the cops thought he would, but he certainly has the potential to do that, right? Um, the allegations with the now hundreds of people, I just read that he's got another 120 accusations that are coming. You can't say he wouldn't go out and try to hurt another kid and get drunk and do the dumb shit that he was doing. So, and as a judge, I wouldn't want that on my conscience, Like
Yeah.
I've got an opportunity to keep this guy behind bars. And again, and they also like I said, it's the running and it's the behavior, but it's also the weight of the evidence. If the evidence is such that when it comes in the beginning and the judge looks at it at the preliminary or when the indictment is dropped and it's just overwhelming, a lot of times they'll put bail much higher because I'm not saying that they're guilty, but what I'm saying is that the prosecution has made such a case that it's like this guy's most likely doing the things that the prosecutor says.
But that's the problem with, like, state versus federal bail because in the state system, he probably woulda got out because he could pay, and then vice
Yep.
versa, like, you have people in the state that should be on bail for way less, but they can't because
Yep.
they have to pay, and in the
Yeah.
feds, like, are you a flight risk and are you a danger to the community? Which they
Yep.
argued that, he's the danger to the community, but it's very, like, one-sided, like, with the state, and that's why guys like, look at the Brock Turner case, remember when that blew up in California?
Mm. Yep.
A while back. Like he got bail and no prison or a couple months after it got appealed, whatever it was. It was wild.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, New York did a pretty bad job of fixing not fixing, they screwed it up, reworking the bail terms. That happened when I was on the job still, it was a few years before I left, and I I get it. Even as a law enforcement guy, and not all of my partners necessarily agreed, but I understand that we don't need to be putting bail on people that are drug users and have, petty crimes and they don't have any money. And so why are we putting $300 bail on them when, there's no reason to keep them in jail. I'm totally okay with that. I'm glad that New York State looked at that and said, let's look at this with a little more empathy and say, obviously we want bail for the people that are bad people, not people who are stealing, in order to support a drug habit or something. But at the same time, they went too far. Right? The state legislature went way too far and included non-bailable offenses that are pretty serious crimes. Right there, I remember being indicting people when I was still on the job and coming through with a couple of C felonies, and they're like, "Oh no, that one in particular is a non-bailable offense." I'm like, "That's multiple C felonies for possession of coke, whatever it was." And they're like, "Yeah, we can't put any bail on." And then guess what? Gone. One of the last guys that I did in one of my cases, he's in Jamaica. We knew he was going to leave, but the law specifically didn't allow the judge to put bail on, so he's gone. Who
Yeah,
knows
I
where we'll
mean,
ever find him
it's
again?
gotta be frustrating as a law enforcement officer when you know, like, you've heard the evidence, but some of that might not even be admissible, or the court hasn't heard all the details yet,
Yep.
and a bad guy gets let out. Like, I've interviewed so many NYPD cops, like, probably like 10 by now, and they all say, consistently, the guys that get out on bail, more than likely not, reoffend and cause another issue that's worse than their first offense, and I think we talked about that before too.
Yeah. No, it's unfortunately it is true. I mean, but there's a positive kind of in that, and to say like there obviously is a lot of crime if you look at it from the outside, but it's not really everybody who does it, right? It's a people that typically reoffend, and it's within a smaller community. It's not like all of these people are out there committing crimes all the time, right? And a lot of times we have good people who just make poor choices, and we get them back out and they start podcasts, and we do lives with them on Monday night, and here we are, you know?
Yeah, how do you do like any of like your law enforcement friends like find it strange that you interact with someone that's a felon or any of that? What do you think about that?
No, I most of my buddies were like, "Oh, yeah, okay, this is really cool. I watch Ian's show or whatever." I will say this. I did have a good friend of mine, and I don't think he's watching. So I did have a good friend of mine. We went out to lunch a couple of days after the interview came out, right when you put it on YouTube,
Mhm.
and another investigator that I had worked with sent him the video and was like, "Did you know that John went on and did Ian's show and was talking about wires and what the fuck?" Blah, blah, blah. And my buddy was like, "Yeah, it was fine. It was pretty cool. I thought it was." This other investigator's like, "Oh, he's telling everybody the secrets and they're all gonna get away." Blah blah blah. He was just going crazy, and I'm like, "Shut up."
Yeah, I don't think you
Nowhere,
gave
no,
any secrets. Yeah,
stop.
you gave a
I
very like vague like but interesting perspective, you know?
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
I mean, that
yeah.
was my goal, right? There's a lot of
And
I got a
I've
lot of
learned,
friends.
yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
No, go ahead.
I've learned how to kinda, like, bounce around, like, when you're dealing with professionals,
Yeah.
in law enforcement and stuff, I think that's what makes me a decent interviewer because I have to you can't like, there's stuff I know out of respect not to ask and not to
Yeah.
poke at, and you kinda navigate it that way.
Yeah, that's and it's brilliant that you do it that way, you know? I still have lots and lots of friends who are on the job who are working really, really hard every single day to try, in their mind, right, make the streets safe, right? And trying to get poison like heroin and cocaine and fentanyl and get that off the street and get it out of kids' hands and send these organized crime groups that are from Mexico and everywhere else, get them out of the United States because they just do nothing but cause havoc. And we use tools like wiretapping to arrest those folks. And it's not because there's like government overreach, it's because these organized crime groups have spent a lot of time trying not to get caught. And so
Mhm.
sometimes the government has to use certain tools in order to try to get them off the street. And certainly people who are in the business are not going to talk about some of the tricks of the trade and how we do that, right?
Yeah.
And because it could put people in danger. Put police officers who are just trying to do the right thing in danger. I'm not doing that. That's for sure.
Do you think they had wiretaps on Diddy?
I didn't see it in the indictment.
Mm,
And what I would say is, at least now, so this is a federal indictment, and I don't have as much experience with the feds as I do the state. What I will say is, in New York State, if you wiretap somebody and you go through the indictment, you have to tell them. There is
mhm.
no there is no way out about it. Now, when I say have to, it's 99% of the time. Sometimes you can get a very specific order from the judge if you're able to articulate that there's a violence issue, or, something unique, where by telling the defendant or the public that it was a wiretap, that it would cause more harm. But I've actually never seen that, and in every case I've ever been a part of, or any case I've ever even tangentially been a part of, you have to tell the defendant there's a wiretap involved in New York. Again, this is federally, so I don't know, but generally that comes out. It seems to me that witness testimony is a lot of what happened to him. If you just read the indictment, with everybody coming in and saying, this is what happened, this is what I saw, this is what I saw. And it sounds as if it's going to be very strong evidence, because it's not just one person, right? There's corroborating evidence from all of these other people. And once you have dozens and dozens and dozens of people coming in and presenting this information, and then they give further corroborating evidence to the police officers, right? They'll say, I was here on October 1st and I saw Diddy do this thing at 3 in the morning. Right. Then they find out that Diddy's cell phone was there at 3 in the morning, and that your cell phone was there at 3 in the morning, and you're piecing all these things together, and you're saying, okay, this person's testimony is pretty solid. Then you have another one and another one and another one, and it's that looks like what the majority of his troubles are going to come from.
It's interesting you brought up they have to tell you. I've actually interviewed like a few people recently where they said that they were like wiretapped and their friends got caught on a wiretap and they got like a letter in the mail or something saying, "Hey, you were on this
Oh,
wire." This is from
yep,
like years ago. They're talking about that. Is that still active now? And is that
100%.
true?
It's
Really?
a no, it's what we call a notice of intercept.
Oh.
And in New York State, it is mandatory that now, if I'm ever going to use evidence collected in a wiretap, potentially against somebody else that maybe I didn't indict yet, I have to give them a notice of intercept. I have to. So if I never plan on indicting them, I don't have to tell them. Right? They could have come up on my case. They were somebody that was not a criminal. They were not committing any crimes. They were not doing any of those things. Um, and I'm never going to indict them. I don't have to tell them that they were wiretapped. But if I'm gonna use wiretap evidence against you, I have to tell you. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought that was so fascinating. Like, and ever since you came on, everyone's been so, like, there's been so many wiretap stories.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine now. They're coming out of the woodwork a little bit.
I have never got wiretapped, but I have, like, PTSD even though I'm not doing anything illegal. I, like, always feel
Yeah,
like someone's listening, like, on the conversation just because,
yeah,
like, I gave up my passcode when I got arrested to the
yeah.
agents,
Sure.
um, I guess there was, like, some articles that if you don't give up your passcode, it's harder for them to get into the iPhone, at least back then. Wasn't there, like, a lawsuit with Apple? Do you know anything about that?
I do. Yeah, yeah.
About
So,
getting into the phones?
yep. So Apple it focuses a lot on privacy, right? And Apple doesn't know what your passcode is on your device. That data is saved on the device itself. So there is no way for a prosecutor or anybody else. You couldn't have your best friend, if something happened to your phone and you couldn't get in, you couldn't take all of your information, you couldn't take your ID, and you and your best friend are going to go to Apple and say, "Listen, I don't remember my passcode. Can you unlock it?" It's impossible. That data does not exist in Apple's hands. They're just going to tell you, "I hope that you saved everything in the iCloud, because we're going to have to restart your phone." It's the only way to get into the device. The lawsuit issue came in, and I think we might have talked about this in my episode. It came in with the San Bernardino shooting back in
Mhm.
California. I think it was 2017, where the FBI wanted to get into the device and they didn't have the passcode. So they went to Apple and they said, "Apple, open the phone." And Apple said, "We can't," just like I said. And so the FBI was trying, so Department of Justice, really, the Department of Justice wanted Apple to create a software program that would unlock the phone. So they asked Apple, "I know that you don't have this software, but can you write it? Can you literally create it right now, upload it to the device, and then unlock that phone? And Apple said yes, but we're not doing it. And the courts found with Apple and said, if something exists and you're legally allowed to have it, right? The DOJ, Apple would be forced to give it up. No issue. If somebody had like this little software program saved on some server inside Apple and it literally did exist, the judge would have ordered them to give it over. But because it didn't exist, the judge found that you can't order somebody to literally make something if it doesn't exist and then turn it over. And so because Apple doesn't have that program, there's nothing to hand over.
Oh, so they still can't get into the phones now? I mean,
No,
there's
no, no.
gotta
They
be a
got
way.
it. They
Okay.
got into the phone later.
Yeah, because I mean,
So
in prison, when guys would get popped with phones, they get sent
yep.
out to the FBI, and they're able to get into all of them within, like, 3 or 4 months.
Depends on the phone. It depends on the iOS version, specifically with Apple. Apple is constantly battling people that are trying to get into their devices without the passcode. Um, I'm not going to get into the specifics of any of that, but there are programs that exist where companies are working to try and get around that capability, right? So it's a constant battle between the cell phone companies and then these other companies that are trying to get into the back door. So that's that. Just leave it at that.
Yeah, it must have been fascinating for you and your role to kinda see how technology evolved. Like, when you first started, there was probably no iPhones, right?
No, 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 no. Well, yes, but nobody really dealt with them that much. I got on the job in '08, so it was
Okay.
just brand new iPhones. What was the new cool thing for us in wiretapping, or the new cool thing on the street, and then a challenge for us in wiretapping was Nextel's push to talk. Everybody was using push to talk chirping, right? And that it as a wiretap team, that sucked because when you make a phone call, you just pick the phone up, you make the phone call, and then as an investigator, you could just listen to the call. All you have to do is press the button on your screen once, and then you start listening. Well, push to talks, every single time somebody chirped, it was considered a separate phone call. So when somebody chirped on the Nextel, we had to click the screen in order to get the call. And then when it chirped back, we would have to click the screen to get the second one. And then when they chirped back, you'd have to click. So, like, as a wiretap guy, you were like, God, I hope to God they don't use Nextels. I hope to God. And then you get with somebody and they're using Nextels, and you're like, "Damn it, I don't want to wiretap this guy because we're going to be hitting this goddamn screen all night long." It
That's
sucked.
so funny. On the topic of the iPhones, do you think it's safe to have, like, your debit cards and credit cards in there in the wallet? Like, is that saved just to your phone?
Yes. So Apple doesn't keep that information either. They have no right. They have no purpose to have that. If there's anything that goes through any of Apple's servers, in order to make the transaction happen, it's encrypted in the same way that your iMessages are encrypted. So Apple has no idea when you send an iMessage from an iPhone to an iPhone to your buddy, the Apple can't get in the middle of those conversations. It cannot see what it is you're doing. It's encrypted in what they call peer-to-peer encryption. So it's encrypted at one device, it's sent over however it's sent wirelessly, whatever, and it's de-encrypted on the other device. And it's the two keys, literally encryption keys on both devices, that know what each other are and know how to de-encrypt the message. But from in between those 2 points, there's it's just gobbledygook. It's just zeros and numbers. Same thing with Apple. So if they get access to your phone, or even if somebody gets access to, say, an Apple server where all of your debit card information is, it's all encrypted. So nobody would be able to do anything with it. They wouldn't be able to unlock any of it.
So is this then what the problem is with TikTok, that they're storing our information and uploading it, compared to, like, Apple, who
So,
doesn't store the information?
yeah, it's yes and no. TikTok is different because it's not owned by an American company. It's owned, and it's actually not really. I don't remember if we talked about this on my episode or not, but it's not really TikTok. It's ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok, and they're a Chinese company, um, and that's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And there is information out there that's not available to the public that describes what the Chinese Communist Party is doing with that information. And it's not just about the funny little videos that you put on your TikTok account and you dance and do silly things and then post it, right? It has nothing to do with that. China's not interested in those videos in that way. What China's interested in is taking as much of that data that it can from each device, right? Your IMEI, your IMSIs, your Mac ID, from your laptop, and every device that's connected around you. So the router in your home, when your phone that has TikTok on it connects to a router, it now takes all the router information. And then every other device that comes into your house that connects to that same router, now TikTok takes all of that information, right? And what they want to do is build a pattern of life, really, on as many people as possible so they can know where people are going and what they're doing. And so it's all about, and we're getting into like kind of military stuff that might be boring, but it's all about the potential for a conflict over Taiwan. That's all the Chinese care about in this instance. And so, what a benefit it would be to them to have all of this phone data, all of these laptop data routers, and they could develop information like how many of these people work at hospitals? How many of these people are law enforcement? How many of these people are in the National Guard? And now they can start doing patterns of life, and they can literally draw out where it is these people are working, how often they go to work, and map this stuff out. Why would any of this really matter? It wouldn't matter in today's world. It matters if there's a conflict over Taiwan because now China's going to know how long it takes every National Guard member to show up to their local armory. And now China's going to know how many people are in the army or the navy and which units are going to be activated and which ones aren't. Right. So, for example, it's classified right now. If I tell you that, I'm just making this up, obviously, but it would be classified if I knew that the 82nd Airborne was getting ready to deploy to Israel. That would be classified. You're not supposed to know that, and you're not going to know until they hit ground. That's an order that stays within our world. But what if China had enough information on all the devices that are carrying TikTok, which is millions and millions and millions, that they could do a pattern of life and determine all of the phones that are connected to the 82nd Airborne, that as soon as that order came out, just by looking at what happens outside of Fort Liberty, they can figure out where everybody's going, and China will know days in advance that the 82nd Airborne is getting activated. That's the kind of information that they're taking that is damaging to the United States. It's and I when we have these conversations about TikTok, I understand the everyday person who's like, it just doesn't make any sense. You're talking about this China stuff, and like I don't put any personal shit on here, and it's just my daughter dancing. It's not about any of those things. It's about the stuff that people in the national security world are looking at, and they're saying, if the day comes when we have to do something with Taiwan, I want to make sure that that information is safe. You know, and it's just not good. Let's put it that way. And
So why don't they come
go
up
ahead.
with like the analogy you're giving? Why don't the politicians say that and break that down
It's called
and give
sources
that
and methods.
analogy?
It's called
Okay.
sources and methods. So if the the government has to balance risk and reward off sources and methods. If there's information out there that we have access to, that we put out, that China doesn't know we know, then now they can close the loophole. And so because we've given them a source. Um, so there's there's just things that we know that are going to stay within the classified world, again, because if we told anybody, then China's going to know we have it, and then they're going to go and try and change their excuse me they're going to change their behavior or whatever it is to try and restrict us from getting that information.
Mm,
So if it's like giving up a ci, right? It's not just saying, if I'm going to keep my CI's information away from you. I'm not going to tell you it's John Smith. However, if somebody else knows that John Smith is the only one who knows I drove a blue car, but I put it out into the public that I was told about the blue car, now everyone's going to know John Smith is the one that said it. It's that simple. China does the same thing. If I tell them or I tell you, they're going to say, "How the hell did they? How did how did the US have that? Oh shit, they must be listening to this or they must be doing that thing." So close that down, shut that down because the US is obviously listening, right? Can't do that.
Interesting. And now
Bad
this type
juju.
of military stuff is what you talk about on your YouTube, right?
Yeah, mainly. I do some law enforcement stuff, but the show's still kind of new. I'm only about 30 episodes in, and I do spend most of my time talking about the military conflict landscape and foreign affairs and that kind of thing for just because I've spent, I did law enforcement obviously for 14 years, as I had said, but I also did, and I'm still in the army today as an intelligence officer, and I've done that for 27 years. So spent time in Iraq, spent time in Afghanistan, spent time in Kuwait, and aside from all the other trainings and traveling, I've been to Japan, all these different things. So um, yeah, so I spend a lot of time talking about that. And TikTok's one thing I like to try to convince everybody not to use, but
And you don't use TikTok
nonetheless,
at all, you don't have it
nope,
downloaded. Oh, yeah, as a government employee,
nope.
you're not even allowed to, right?
I'm not allowed to on any government device. I can do whatever I want on a personal side.
Okay,
I just don't. I
interesting.
just don't. Um,
So, from a law enforcement officers, going back to Diddy for a second, when you read
yeah,
because you
yeah.
said you read the indictment today,
I read part of it. Yeah.
what did you think about the whole baby oil thing? Like, do you think that
I
was
mean, it's
necessary to blow up into the news like that?
Probably not. Necessary is a strong word. I don't think it was necessary. But I will say that everything's calculated. Um, and I will say that I wouldn't put it past a prosecutor or law enforcement working with them to strategically take certain pieces of information and put it into an indictment so the public knows for a certain purpose. Right now, you may not think that that's fair or that's nice, but um, I didn't work this case. I don't know if that's true or not, but based on my experience, that's really the only way you would want to do that, is to be able to um, just paint a picture, right? And that's part of what an indictment is too. You'll see when you read an indictment, it's obviously, you've seen yours, you've seen other ones. They're paragraph form. It's really kind of a story. They're explaining with all the evidence in there, obviously, but they're explaining what it is this potential defendant did and how the prosecutors proved it. But in the same way, it's a narrative. So there's information in there that might not be technically related to a charge, but it does again paint the picture to the judge. In this instance, the indictment's going to a judge, not going to a jury, but it's saying to the judge, look at what we've been able to discover. This is why, we have this indictment and we believe this person can be arrested. Will you issue an arrest warrant? And sometimes that fluff matters a little bit. I mean, there are plenty of
Yeah,
times that when I put into an affidavit, like and again, you may not think it's fair, but if I had evidence where I had somebody who was buying a bunch of drugs down in New York City, and then which is a charge in that sense, right? Like I could charge them with possession, and then they drove all the way up multi-county, came back here into Albany, where I'm from, and he sold that cocaine. He kept it in his house for a couple days, and then he sold that cocaine. So I'm going to get him on a charge for that sale. But it may help to paint the picture to the judge what type of phone calls that person was making in between the drive from New York to Albany, to give the judge an idea of his frame of mind. Maybe he was a really bad guy and was constantly screaming at his wife. Maybe because, she was potentially involved, but maybe not always involved. Like, so some of those things where you're like, why is that even relevant? It has nothing to do with the possession or the sale charge. Again, it's kind of painting that narrative.
yeah. It's interesting, and also, like, I remember from my criminal trial, like, some things in the indictment aren't even allowed to be introduced at trial, like the actual wording, or, like, they had to be careful with what, was entered in, so, like, in a case like the Diddy thing, you don't even know if the baby oil thing will even be admissible,
Correct.
into it. There could
Yep.
be a lot of parts. I feel like the indictment is kinda the prosecution's, like, press release to kinda get out there to the public and the world to see that.
Yeah, and remember too, an indictment doesn't necessarily mean guilt, right? I mean, it's when an indictment is as full as it is in this case, right? People are going to make the assumption already. I mean, the guy's most likely guilty, right? This isn't, again, a he said, she said kind of an incident where there was one charge and you don't know if the person killed that person or didn't, right? This is very, very different. But it doesn't mean that he's guilty. What it means is that a grand jury found that there's enough evidence to arrest. It's not enough evidence to convict. There's just enough evidence to arrest. That's all a grand jury is. So you may have heard the term before. It's easy. to a fed the feds can indict a ham sandwich if they wanted to. That's a term that goes through law enforcement all the time. Because again, you don't need evidence for guilt. You only need get evidence for probable cause. That's it. Just get you to the arrest. So, and when you have a secret indictment, which is what this indictment is, there is no defense. So of course it's going to sound like a prosecution's press release because there is no defense attorney in a grand jury process to defend themselves. There was never a defense attorney in any grand jury indictment I was ever a part in because they're secret proceedings. It's only prosecution, it's only the prosecutors showing evidence to the public, the grand jurors, to say, "Hey, do you think there's enough information here to arrest this person?" You don't get a right to a defense attorney because you haven't even been charged. This is just the way beginning preliminary of this. So it's
But
going to sound like
do you think that's fair though?
I do,
Because like
I do.
but what if the person's innocent and gets arrested and goes through that and their life is ruined?
Now,
Because they
so
didn't have a defense attorney to defend them at the at the grand jury.
yeah, so a couple different things. It's not that people that are charged with an indictment or prior to the indictment cannot have a defense attorney. They can. It just all depends on how the case works. So, for example, if police officers arrest somebody for a murder that they believe that they witnessed, it happened on a Friday, blah blah blah, and they arrest this person. Well, in New York State, you can't just arrest you can't go forward in a case with just what they call a felony complaint, meaning I can't just say, as a police officer, I witnessed this murder. I'm writing this up on a piece of paper, which is a felony complaint, and then I'm taking you to court, and now you're going to plead guilty or not guilty. In New York State, you have to get a grand jury indictment. You have to. So if I arrest you for a murder, and right then and there, I want to ask you questions, and you say I want my attorney, absolutely every legal right to do that, then the cops and the prosecutor may say, okay, I only have my felony complaint. I'm now going to go into the grand jury and I'm going to argue in front of the grand jury that you did this. And because that grand jury process is open, everyone knows it's not a secret. I just told you I'm going to put you in the grand jury. Then you can have your defense attorney in there and they can argue. Just like you can argue at a prelim, you can argue in that grand jury. The secret grand jury, like a wiretap grand jury, they exist because the investigation often is still happening. And so if we tell the defendant that we're in grand jury and we're giving evidence to the grand jurors, then you in theory can just stop doing what you're doing and just take off. Right. Like I'm not gonna go after I have 5 charges on a drug dealer selling selling coke, and I'm not done with the case yet, but I know I'm gonna go into grand jury. I'm not gonna go to that guy and go, by the way, we're gonna indict you for sale. He's like I said, he's just gonna turn around and be like, "All right, man, I'm out." He's just gonna leave, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
that's fair. That's totally fair.
that's how the when it's an ongoing typically when an ongoing criminal conspiracy, the grand jury is used in order to continue to investigate and not let the criminals go away. Can and have prosecutors indicted somebody that were not guilty? Of course. It's 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 99.99999% of the time not intentional. It's it's just it's a matter of statistics. I mean, eventually you're going to come across somebody that you just thought did it and they didn't. Now, to be fair, I have been involved in cases before where um let me put it differently. I know of cases that people were indicted um based on witness testimony that may not have been amazing, and it was found later that that person wasn't guilty, and we had to go back and reassess and say, oh, you know what, we probably should have done that a little differently. Maybe we should have went into grand jury with a little bit more evidence, right? We should have had 2 or 3 witnesses as opposed to one witness, something like that can happen. um, it sucks, but I will say, in the few instances that did happen where somebody got indicted and maybe shouldn't have been indicted, they ended up suing and made a lot of money because it was, whatever. They were able to take it to civil court. So um, they ended up doing just fine for themselves later on. But, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, no, the whole wiretapping thing is very interesting, and also I feel like a lot of people get swooped up in those RICO cases because they're, I've met a lot of guys in federal prison that were like very, very low level players that were
Yep.
just swooped up, not given bail, and they're just sitting there, and they're like, you look at their paperwork and stuff, and they don't even know the head guy on there, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of that's from like wiretaps.
Of course. Yeah. So I've had more often than not. That happens a lot because the wire is used to jump from one defendant to another defendant to another defendant because you're trying to take down, if you will, the entire organization. But that's the whole purpose of the law. Meaning, if everyone can just say, "Well, I don't know this guy and I don't know that guy," then how would we ever arrest anybody, right? So that's nonetheless. I've definitely arrested people where they're like, "Why am I in this car?" And we're like, "Well, you're part of this conspiracy and you're part of this big organization." And they're like, the fuck I am. I don't who's this? And I'm like, well, this is this guy. He lives in Schenectady, he does this. And they're like, I've never even been to Schenectady. How would I have anything to do with that? The the problem is this guy I'm talking to who may live in Albany who's never been to Schenectady. He talked to somebody and did a deal with somebody who lives in Latham, and that person who lives in Latham is dealing with somebody who lives in Schenectady. And so no, the law enforcement's not making the claim that the person who lives in Albany knows the person that lives in Schenectady. We're only making the claim that you knew the person in the middle. And then we would have to prove that you knew the person in the middle. It just so happens you're involved in a greater conspiracy because that person in the middle is the one that brought you together, even though you don't
Mhm.
know each other. So it happens.
So do
Happens
you
pretty
think
often.
in today's world it's even possible to get away with any type of crime, like with the way technology is and everything?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm sure. It's not, I mean, people do it all the time, right? There's criminals out there that are probably breaking the law right now, and we're not gonna catch them, right? So, I will say it's probably harder, right? Cameras are everywhere with the fact that we can get DNA on almost everything, right? If we're talking about, like, assaults and murders and those things, that's gonna be a challenge. Um, sitting around slinging crack on the corner, can you get away with that? Sure, right? You can get away with that for a long time, I'm sure. I know a lot of people who have, but in that instance, what people don't often um, what people often forget is that people talk, and I just don't. It doesn't really matter how long you've known somebody, how close you think they are. It's your boy for 3 decades. When people are looking at 30, 40, 50, 60 years in prison, they talk. It just it's just what happens. I've only had in my 14 years in probably arrested about 100 people on felony charges on multiple investigations myself. I've only had one person, literally one person, look at us and say, I'm not doing it, and went to prison for decades because they just wouldn't talk, which is fine. And as a matter of fact, law enforcement respects that greatly. We're like, okay, I mean, you're going to do the time, right? We have the charges on you. And I'm just telling you, we know that all these other things are happening. And if you want 10 years instead of 30, you just let's talk about what your boy did or whatever. And the guy was like, it's just not happening. I'm taking, and the guy went to 20, took 20 additional years because he wouldn't say anything for his buddy. So,
So you respect the
okay,
guy that doesn't snitch.
of course,
Mhm.
of course. Yeah. The problem is though, everybody does. Every, when I say everybody, almost everybody. 'Cause nobody wants to go to prison for 30 years. I don't care how tough you think you are. I don't care what you tell your buddies, right? 30 years is a long this we're not talking about 3 years for for a C felony assault because you beat the nuts off somebody at a bar. I'm talking about you selling multiple ounces of cocaine 25 times, and I have you on the phone doing it 25 times. You're gonna go to prison if you lose a trial for 60, 70, 80 years. That's I mean, you're literally looking at the rest of your life. And people, they're not willing. It's not like they come in and go, "Oh shit, okay, let me tell you everything." There's not a lot of those people either, but once you sit down with your defense attorney and the prosecutor's on one side and the defense attorney's like, you sold drugs on the phone, bro. Like there's this, I'm not getting, it doesn't matter how much money we have. There's no way we're getting out of this thing. I suggest you do what you can to help yourself. most people end up helping themselves. Now, they also like to play games, and they also they like to be um, they try to be tricky, right? They'll do things like um, um, they'll say, "Okay, what if I tell you, Mr. Police Officer, where I know there's a half kilo of cocaine, right? And if I tell you where it is and you go find it, can I get some time off?" Well, potentially, yeah, right. Well, they'll do that knowing that it's their rival gang that has the 500 grams, and they'll go out there and they'll find it, knowing that they'll get time off for it, but it wasn't even their coke, right? That they got it from somebody else, right? Just to hit another gang. Or they'll we've had people before come in and say, "Hey, I bet you I could tell you where a weapon is." And you're like, "Oh, okay, cool. There's a that'll be kind of neat. Yeah, there's a weapon laying in the street. There's a weapon hidden somewhere in the neighborhood. Yeah, tell us where it is." And then they'll call their buddy and just have him go get their grandfather's shotgun and like bring it out and hide it in the hood in the neighborhood and be like, "So, see, I told you I gave you a gun. 10 years off, right?" So now we got to figure out, like, is it really the kind of gun that he was talking about, or is it his grandpa's squirrel gun? Like, what is it? So um the games we all play. But
Yeah, I feel like the concept of snitching has changed in the sense where back then, before technology, like someone would only go down if someone else told on them. But in today's world, a lot of the times they already have all the evidence that just seals the coffin,
yep,
essentially, at trial, so that the prosecution doesn't have to roll the dice. But they will go to that trial without that snitch. So at that point,
yeah,
that's why I think a lot of people are turning and taking those deals because they're laid out with that evidence that,
yeah,
hey, that person was caught on a wiretap. So does your testimony really send them to prison? It's a lot of hypotheticals. And I just think, the stigma around snitching is the same, but the actual, concept of snitching has changed drastically.
yeah. I would agree with you. I mean, especially in my instance, doing wires, when we bring somebody in for a proffer, or to after we get the indictment and we go and arrest them and we bring them in with their defense attorney and we start talking to them, I already know 99% of the answers to what I'm gonna ask you. I already know, right? I've got the video and I've got the audio and I've got all this other stuff. So I'm just looking for you to confirm, to man up, if you will, and just say, "Hey, listen, this is my involvement. This is what I did. I didn't do these things, but I did do this. And yeah, I take ownership for it, whatever." And I'm telling you, most of the time, um, people, at least in my office, we would give time off right when you walked in the door if you were honest. Right when you walk in the door, we'll say, "Listen, you're looking at 10 right now. This is it. This is your deal. We've got you on these A felonies or whatever it is. If you walk in here and leave and don't say a word, we're going to go to your offer is 10. If you come in here and you answer all of the questions that I have and you answer them truthfully, you're going to walk right out of here with 6. That's it. That's your new deal. And I might even make 6 a cap, meaning you could even go lower than 6, depending on if you're able to help yourself even further, down the road. So let's just see if you've got the right mindset to man up to it, right?" And a lot of people do it. They're like, "Yeah, fuck it is what it is," and they'll take 4 years right off and walk out the door because they know we've got all this other stuff that to corroborate. But
Now, do you think the tide is changing in the world in the sense where, like, when we grew up, or when I grew up, we were always like, the rich and powerful don't really, go to prison maybe once in a blue moon. But now in today's world, you do see a lot of these big political celebrity, rich and powerful people they're going after,
yep,
and they're doing prison time. I mean, look at Senator Bob Menendez, yeah,
yeah,
Diddy, all of these big cases, Trump. Regardless of
yep,
what you think about them, they're still being, prosecuted, which is something we didn't really necessarily see when I was growing up, unless it was like obviously a shooting with a rap star or anything like that. Like when
yeah,
I was growing up, a Harvey Weinstein wasn't getting taken down the way it
right.
is now.
Yeah, it's the problem today is that you can't hide anything anymore, really. It's 100 years ago, there is no internet. We're not running around with phones. We're not, all of that kind of stuff. So it'd be a lot easier to have a small group of people, somebody who's really powerful come in and be like, "Listen, I need you to Here's my money, whatever. You're not going to do this thing. And you could have prosecutors or even police officers or whatever be like, oh man, who's ever going to find out? No, nowadays it's just not how that's not possible. How is that not eventually going to get leaked? How is somebody not going to send a text message somewhere? How is somebody not going to have something on their phone? There's just it's just very it would be very hard to not do that. You've got you've got to do the right thing. Nobody really wants to go to jail, prosecutors and cops, right? Not doing the right thing because somebody who's rich just walked in and just wants to get away with it, right? So I'm not going to say human nature has changed. I'm just going to say that there's just so much information out there. How can you really hide?
Yeah, and I mean, even the sentences, like, I was shocked by Elizabeth Holmes's sentence. I was shocked by, the ones the celebrity, the husband and wife that got, over a decade, like, these are some pretty hefty sentences. Sam Bankman-Fried,
Yeah,
his sentence, like, these are heavy, and I think years ago, that was the ones that were getting arrested and sent to prison weren't getting that long of sentences.
yeah,
It,
yeah. Well,
yeah.
anyways, go ahead.
No, it just, it's the world is changing,
Yeah,
drastically,
yeah,
when it comes to the criminal justice, system.
yeah. My longest was, I think it was 117, I think we had on somebody. It was, yeah, that was an interesting case, and he actually took that 117 years is what he got. I don't remember how the judge did all the
Holy
math on it,
cow.
but he actually went to a he appealed the sentence, was like, "Gee, it's 117, this seems like this is crazy. I'm gonna die in prison, blah, blah, blah. All I did is sell drugs. I didn't kill anybody, blah, blah." And went all the way up to the New York State Appellate Court, and they were like, "You know what? You're right. That was excessive. We should not the judge should not have given you 117 years. We're gonna chop that down. 80. Go ahead, 80 years. He's not getting out." Now, he was a bad
No.
guy, but he's not
Yeah,
getting out. But
well, John, it was
he
a
wasn't Ian
great
Bick.
well, it was great talking with you tonight, man. We gotta do this more often.
Yeah, I appreciate
Um,
it.
if you wanna tell people where they could find you at, give them a little summary about what you do now and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, appreciate it. So just got a little website, headlinesandhistory.com, for anybody who's interested in military stuff, military conflict, talking a lot about Israel right now. For those of you that pay attention to overseas stuff, that pager operation was really interesting. Some great intel operations that Israel can conduct. But listen, and this stuff is can really affect everything we do here. This trying times overseas with the war in Ukraine and what's happening in the Middle East, and it's things are busy. So I cover a lot of that, foreign affairs, those type of things, and also have some personal stories. Like I said, I've been in the army now for 27 years, so I've got a little series on there about what it was like to be in Iraq in 2005 and what that was all about. And every once in a while, we'll do some law enforcement stuff and talk about wiretaps and those things. So headlinesandhistory.com is the website.
And how often do you put up episodes?
Every Wednesday morning.
Oh, JD's in the
Every
chat. JD Delay. Look at that. He came and made an
Yeah,
appearance.
nice,
Do you know who
nice.
JD do you know
I
who
don't,
JD
I
is?
don't. No.
Oh, you gotta check him out.
Okay.
He was one of my first episodes. I made him do it shirtless, and his nipples are like rock hard. Yeah, they're like
Oh,
this big.
I
Yeah,
would
so
love
those
to
things
see
could
that.
like cut through. Yeah, if you go on his page,
Cut glass. All right.
you could see that out. But he's a really good dude. I'm gonna be with him again in Nashville this week. I was with him
Oh, that's
last
cool.
week. Yeah, we filmed some prison skits that are gonna be coming out. I don't know if you saw the picture on my Instagram. Do you use
I
Instagram?
did. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I do. Yeah, yeah. I get headlines and history too for Instagram and YouTube. But no, I saw that. I saw that you're going to get ready to do some skits. Now, is that JD that you were
Yep,
with for the
yep,
skits? Oh, that's frick. That'll
he's
be
the
good,
one in
man.
the yeah, he's the one in the picture. We did some funny ones, like, a year ago, and they kinda went really viral,
Yeah.
so it was really funny to see. But that's, like, my
Good.
big
Good.
brother right there. He wouldn't let the Chomos get me
The
if we were in
Chomos.
prison again.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you, John. Thank you everyone for, joining this chat. I thought great conversation, really cool perspective, and you made me not have to work hard on this live tonight.
Yeah. It's good, Ian. It's all good, and
Awesome,
can't wait to come
man.
back.
Yeah, definitely. We're gonna have you back more often, do more topics. Maybe we do an episode where like you're asking me stuff from like the other
Oh
perspective.
yeah.
That
No,
would
that'd
be
be cool.
cool. Yeah,
Yeah, no
you do
doubt.
like a
There's
little
plenty
interview me.
yeah, plenty to learn. We could do that. Love it.
Definitely. All right, well, love you guys and have a great one.